Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's good. It's Tuesday. Happy Active Aging Week. I want to thank Jeannie and the Community Life Group for inviting me to, they invited me to give a talk. I had made several suggestions. They hated all the suggestions. So then they sent Jeannie to have a conversation with me. And then we narrowed it down, and I think we're all happy here. So thank you. Round of applause to Community Life. Well, before I talk, I want to share four things. First, I'm wearing my professor's hat today, which means I have way too much information, which I always do. Second, we're going to review a number of graphs. And so I want you to, I'm going to do my best not to bore you, but we need the graphs to kind of see how things have changed over the decades. Number three, we cannot avoid addressing issues of race, politics, and sexuality. There's no way we can do that because that informs the change and the evolution of religion in America. But we're going to do this. We're not supposed to talk about these things in polite company, but today we're going to address it in a very objective way and in the spirit of intellectual curiosity. And finally, this talk is a little bit of a bolero. It's going to kind of build and build and build, and then at the end, we'll see what happens. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Ozzie and Harriot, they began to work together on the Baker's broadcast. Anyone remember the Baker's broadcast, maybe? They joined the Red Skelton show in 1941. And when Red Skelton was drafted in 1944, the network created the family sitcom, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. And they produced 402 radio episodes in a 10-year span, which is very, very impressive. And then on television, they started in 1952. And they remained on the air until 1966. That's 14 years on television. That's the longest running show on television until 2004, when another program beat it in its 15th year. The Simpsons. It's true, The Simpsons. But then there was another, that's a cartoon, of course, right? But there was another show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And that renewed its 15th year. And that was the first time another show was longer than the Ozzie and Harriet show. Now, today's talk is not about Ozzie and Harriet, right? It's about the Americans' belief in God and how it's changed from the 1950s until the present. But Ozzie and Harriet, they give us a starting point for this exploration and what it represents. Because Ozzie and Harriet became synonymous with the 1950s ideal American family life. And perhaps one of the reasons that this show became so popular is because it never discussed politics or religion. They never went to church. There was no sin on the program. There were only misunderstandings. Fun fact, did you know in his autobiography, Ozzie Nelson wrote that he was actually an atheist? Isn't that interesting, right? That kind of changes things in our head a little bit, right? This is the cover of Time magazine in 1966. That's a great year. You know why? I was born, 1966. That's the year. And so this article focused on Christian theologians who were wrestling with the idea of a world without a God, right? By the 1960s, America's social climate was changing, right? And the Nelson's family ideal of values was beginning to seem dated. The Gallup poll first began asking what is known as the God question. The God question. Frank Newport, who was Gallup's editor-in-chief, he said, quote, Americans felt obliged to say they were religious. But nowadays, a lot of those same people feel more comfortable telling the interviewer, no, I don't believe in God. I have no religious affiliation. Therefore, he says, the data may not necessarily reflect a decline in belief. Perhaps it reflects that people are being more honest about their religious beliefs now than they were in the past, right? The nuns, N-O-N-E-S. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. According to the Gallup poll in 1965, 97% of the population stated they believed in a God. In 1965. Now how do I do the, here it goes. 1965, 97. 3% said they had no belief. In 2014, it was up to 12% of the American population said they had no belief in a God. So that's an 11-point percentage drop, right? Now, the increased spiritual honesty about spirituality may account for the rise of no religious affiliation, or people that the social scientists identify as the nuns. Because when they're asked, do you have any religious affiliation? They say, I have none. So that's become the title for that group. Now, and it's interesting because the number of nuns, I'll come back to that. All right. Now, this is what's important. While people say they're none or they have no religious affiliation, that doesn't mean that they don't believe in God or in a higher power. What they're saying is that they don't identify with a religion or have a religious affiliation. And we'll speak more about that, but that's an important distinction. Now, I'm using a number of sources for my talk, but this is the one that I'm leaning the most on. I heard him give a talk once, and I bought his book, and I'm leaning on it. And it's called The Nuns, Where They Came From, Who They Are, and Where They Are Going. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Now, how do we define religious affiliation? And this is important, right, for surveys. So there are three major ways: behavior, belief, and belonging. Behavior is tangible evidence that we see, right? Church attendance, individual prayers, maybe donating to a church, sharing your faith with others, right? So that's kind of behavior. Belief is what you believe. What do you believe? And this is what most people think about in terms of religious affiliation. And then the third thing is belonging. To what religious group do you belong? Now, this is where things get a little muddy when we look at this data, right? It's that you may have a person who no longer belongs to or affiliates with a religious group, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've changed their behavior or their beliefs. So, for example, last year, if I asked you what was your religious affiliation, you might say Methodist or Presbyterian or Jewish, right? Or Muslim. And then this year, you're asked the same question, and you might respond, I have no religious affiliation. So what happened, right? What happened? Does that mean that you really changed your belief or your behavior? What's more plausible, social scientists say, is that people rarely attend or they stopped attending services for various reasons. And we're going to look at some of the reasons, suggested reasons of why people may not be going to church or synagogue or mosque, right? But it's really important because the way you self-identify religiously or ethically is a very important part of your identity. So these are really important questions. Now, social scientists use a system called RELTRAD, or religious traditions, right? RELTRAD. And they look at 7 major categories. And we can critique it, right? You automatically say, well, that's not enough, right? And we're going to touch on that in a minute. But it asks a series of questions based on religious affiliation. And sometimes it'll ask a question For example, it might ask, are you Christian? Are you Christian? And if you say yes, right, one of the other surveys, then they'll ask you a follow-up question. What denomination, right? So you might say Baptist, and then you might have another follow-up. Well, which Baptist denomination, right? So some of these surveys are very simple, and some are much more complicated. But these are, generally speaking, 7 categories of identifying religion in America. So I want to take a quick look at the 7 categories because it's really important, especially if you see studies on TV or in the paper. So I want you to hang in with me, okay? I know I'm doing a lot of talking. Evangelical Protestants. The term evangelical is debated what it means, right? And there are various reasons. The largest, anyone want to guess what the largest evangelical denomination is in America? More specifically, Southern Baptist. That's the largest evangelical group. So the largest Protestant group. What's the largest Christian denomination? Catholic, right? Okay, now, in 1993, 30% of the population self-identified as evangelical. In 2018, 22% identified. That's an 8% drop. That's an 8% drop of evangelicals, people who identify as evangelical. Mainline Protestants, so that's like mainline Protestants, it's a big umbrella. And of the mainline Protestant denominations, which one is the largest? Methodist, right? Methodist. And usually, they're what's called like the 7 largest denominations. United Methodist, Evangelical Lutheran, Presbyterian Church USA, Episcopal Church, American Baptist Church, Disciples of Christ, and United Church of Christ, right? Now, it's interesting. In 1972 until 1983, the largest tradition in the United States was mainline Christianity. And while we may view mainline Protestantism as more liberal, that's not always been the case. You could be a member, you could be in a congregation of what's considered a liberal or a denomination, and I'm not using these terms judgmentally, right? They're just a descriptor. You might be a member of a congregation that's part of a more liberal denomination, but that congregation may be more conservative or traditional, right? So that happens a lot. So in 1976, 31% of the American population were mainline Protestants. Jimmy Carter might represent one of the most popular. In 2016, 10% of the population were mainline Protestants. That's a 21-point percentage decline in mainline Protestants. So already you're seeing a decline both in evangelicals and significantly in mainline Protestants. Black Protestants. Now, because of the unique history of blacks in America and their denial in social and political and religious groupings, they have often developed their own organizations and churches and denominations. If white Christians wanted to join a social club or they could just simply apply and become a member. Blacks could not experience that. So the church became a place not only for spiritual growth, but for socialization, for political support, and for social support. Now, to complicate matters when we look at this data, is that generally speaking, black Protestants and evangelical conservatives share a lot of more conservative values. For example, black Protestants are just as likely to believe that the Bible is literally true as evangelicals, right? And there's very little difference when it comes to their views on same-sex marriage. Yet, their politics are very different. This is really important. Their politics are different. 4 out of 5 evangelicals voted Republican. That's like 80%, right? And typically, 9 out of 10 black Protestants vote Democrat. So here are 2 large groups that share some common theology or social perspectives, but politically, are very, very different. That's really important as we look at all this information. In the mid-1980s, almost 9% of Americans were affiliated with the Black Protestant tradition. In 2018, 6% of Americans identify with that tradition. That's a 3% decline. So you're seeing a pattern here, right? Every group so far is declining. The next group, Catholics. Now, many in the 18th and 19th century, the immigrants, they came from Catholic countries, and they didn't really have, that was their religion. Many of the more recent immigrants come from Central and South America, while many of the early century, meaning not the century we're in, right, the previous one, I keep forgetting we're not in the 20th century anymore, were from Europe. So right now, in 2018, 25% of the Catholic population is not white. That hasn't always been the case. That shows you the change, right, of the demographics of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is still one of the most dominant religious institutions. In 1972, 27% of the American population identified as Catholic. In 2018, it's 23%. So that's a 4% decline. See a pattern here? Jews. Judaism in the United States has a long history, and it's a complicated history. Many Jews arrived from Europe during the great waves of the 1800s. While Jewish synagogues can be found all over the U.S., they're primarily in the Northeast. Now, American Jews have always been numerically small in population, but have had a significant role in American society and politics. Jewish Americans serve as a very strong democratic voting bloc. The reason for this, it's one suggestion is given, one theory, is that Jewish people see themselves as outsiders in their society and think the Democratic Party has consistently tried to cater to more marginalized and population groups. In 1972, Jews made up 3% of the American population. In 2018, they made up 1.7% of the population. So that's a 1.3% point decline. Now, of course, to put this in perspective, to put that number in perspective, Buddhists and Hindus together are about 1.3%. Mormons are about 1.3%. Now, and we know that Judaism is not just a religious affiliation, but it's a cultural identity, right? So many Jews who are not religiously active may still check the box for Jewish on surveys because of their ethnic ties to Judaism. Observers of other faith traditions. Now, one of the difficulties in classifying these groups is that once you start leaving the larger groups, you have a number of smaller groups. Rel trad here, they have this other faith tradition category, right, as a catch-all. And in here you include Muslims, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindus, pagans, and other religious traditions. In the mid-1980s, 3% of Americans, 3% were of another faith tradition, right, other than the large ones. This has slowly risen to 6% in 2018. So here we see that this other faith tradition has increased 3 points, right? So I have this in red to show the decrease here and an increase here. Now, what's fueling this increase of faith traditions? That's a whole other talk, but I want to share quickly just 3 points that are said might be of interest to you. Number one, likely the increase of immigration in the United States, right? That's one reason. Number two, the falling birth rates of white women is also informing that tradition. And number three, that more and more Americans are rejecting the traditional labels of Protestant, Catholic, Christian, right? Muslim, Jewish. They're using terms like spiritual, right? And so those folks would fall in that other faith tradition. Now we're moving into that seventh category, the nuns, right? And so it's important to know that of the 6 religious traditions, again, 5 are smaller today than they were in 1972. The only one that's increased a little bit is the other faith tradition. And then we have here, the nuns. In 1972, 5% of the population said they were not religiously affiliated. In 2018, 24% say they're not religiously affiliated. That's almost a quarter of the population say none when they're asked, are you religious? Right? That's an incredible swing from the 1950s. So let's look at these numbers. Look at the decrease, right, of the traditional categories. A little increase here. And look, 19% point increase of people who are not religiously affiliated. So we needed to look at the data to show that this is like a real thing that's happening. All right, now, how many nuns, N-O-N-E-S, right, are there really in the United States? That's like a whole other lecture, right? But I just want to show you, here's one survey, right, that just asked this. We just looked at this, okay? Here's another survey by the Pew Research, and they'll say, what is your present religion? Here they have 12 categories: Protestant, Roman Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox, such as Greek or Russian, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, atheist, agnostic, something else, or nothing in particular, right? So an atheist is a person who says there is no God. An agnostic is a person that says there's no way to prove there's a God, right? So you can be an agnostic atheist. Most, well, I don't know about most, but you know, and then someone else or something else or nothing. These 4 categories together represent the nuns, right? Just keep that in mind, right? I just want to show you how when you look at a survey, you want to look at, oh, what questions are they asking? This is the example of where they ask, are you Protestant? Yes. Next, if you say Protestant, then the next button. Which denomination? Right? Methodist. Next button. Which one? United Methodist. Now, hold on with me. Hold on. Now, look at this. All right? In case you were wondering, here are 6 different surveys asking about, do you believe in a God? One survey, the Gallup survey, says there's 21% of the population. And another survey here, the Cooperative Election Study by Harvard, says 37%. So depending on which survey you're looking at, you might hear 21 to 37% of the American population are not religiously affiliated, or they say, I don't affiliate with religion. Now, what's really important here, obviously, number one, look at the breadth of the diversity of the numbers. But what I also want to show you is, no matter what survey you look at, all of them say there's a significant drop in that, right? So I needed to go around the block to get to this page right here, so you could see that these are real numbers, and it's a reality. All right, now, I'm sorry, give me one moment here. I'm sure you have a bunch of questions, but you got to hold on. Hang on. So here are just some highlights regarding religious affiliations since Ozzie and Harriot. One, people who identify as religiously affiliated have significantly increased from 21 to 37%, right, depending on what survey. Number 2, because of social desirability bias, and I'm going to talk about that more, which is just a nice way of saying lying, right? When people lie on a survey. Because of social desirability bias, the percentage of nuns is likely higher. And the thinking is that when people are asked, so when people are asked, there's a general sense that religion in America and civil religion is so important that people are embarrassed still, even on a survey, to admit that they're not part of part of a religion, and that they might tend to say yes and not. That's social desirability, right? So the thinking is that maybe it's even higher. Number 3, mainline Protestantism has significantly dropped, and conservative Christianity is remaining steady so far. All right. Why are people becoming, this is the last part of my talk, why are people becoming more religiously affiliated, right? So here are 8 reasons that are given, and we're going to take a quick look at each one. First, secularization. The society is becoming more secularized. Now, it's interesting. In Europe, Poland, 44% of the population still goes to church, right? 34% of Slovakia goes to church. Now, you scroll down. Denmark, about 3% of the population goes to church. Italy and Portugal, it's about 25%. That's about the American population. So Italy and Portugal, US, it's about there. But if you look at, I know this might be hard to see, I'm sorry. You see the countries, about the low numbers of people who are going to church. So number 1, secularization. Number 2, increase in wealth. Secularization, the philosophy of secularization argues that the higher the education achievement, the lower the church attendance, right? That the more money one makes, the less they need religion. One argument is that humans, from secularization perspective, that humans are in a search for existential security, right? The more money you have, the more secure you feel, the less you need God, right? The less money you have, the more insecure you feel, you got to hold on to God, right? More. That's part of the thinking. You could agree or disagree, debate, right? This is some of the suggestions that are made. That the increase of wealth has influenced the decrease of religious attendance or religious affiliation. Number 3, social desirability bias. And I mentioned that, right? Now, one example is, let's say Ozzie and Harriot, what did I say, 1950s, mid-1950s. Let's say mid-1950s, Northwest Ohio. What population would be Christian, would say they're Christian if they, right? Like 99.9% of the people are going to say they're Christian, right? But is it really true, right? So social desirability bias would say, well, of course they're all going to say that, because that was a time where you would never admit that you weren't Christian, because you might lose your job, people might discriminate against you, you might lose friends, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So social desirability bias is saying that sometimes we just lie. People just lie, especially in surveys. So that's interesting. Next, the internet, the increase of the internet. Some studies have shown that people who may not ordinarily share their opinions publicly share them anonymously on online environments, right? Now, however, that may not be the case if you're on Facebook, where you have pictures of yourself and people know, right? There you might be a little bit more cautious. But think about this. In 1997, that's not that long ago, right? 1997, 18% of the US population had the internet. Now, 92% of the American population have the internet. So you can go to any church you want around the world, right? You could find a community that you feel comfortable with. You don't need to go to a local church. So some argue that the rise of the nuns and the rise of internet access correlate. Number 5, politics. Now, this is the more sensitive area, so just kind of put on your seatbelts and hang on with me, okay? There's no judgment here, but we have to look at this. In recent years, we've often heard the statistic that 84% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump, right, in the 2020 elections. However, white evangelicals have consistently supported Republican candidates. In 2008, 79% of white evangelicals voted for John McCain for president, and in 2012, 77% voted for Mitt Romney. So So the numbers are about the same, a little bit higher, right? The same applies to black Protestants for Democrats. According to Pew Research Center, 91% of black Protestants voted for Biden, and about the same number voted for Hillary Clinton. So, okay. So what does this have to do with non-religiously affiliated people, right? So this over here, I just want to show you. This is here where it says Biden here, 91, black Protestant, 91. For Trump, 9%. And here, 84, white evangelical Protestant, 84% for Trump, 15 for Biden, right? All right, now hold on, hang on. Now look over here. Here's another very interesting graph, right? So, whoop, my bad. From here, from 1978, right? Just look at how this goes up. Now, interesting, a liberal, whatever a liberal is, right? Here they have liberal and leans liberal. And then moderate in the middle, leans conservative, and then conservative, right? Just kind of go with this for a minute. A liberal is twice as likely as a moderate and almost 5 times more likely than a conservative to be disaffiliated. Let me repeat that. A liberal is about almost 5 times more likely to be a nun. In 1988, however, that wasn't always the case. In 1988, 15% of liberal, I keep doing this, sorry, Stacy, 15% of liberals were unaffiliated, right? Over here. And look at how high it is now. So liberals weren't always as religiously unaffiliated. It's significantly increased over the years. So it's fair to say, objectively, and we're generalizing, but objectively speaking, it's fair to say that liberals have always been more likely to be religiously unaffiliated. But here's a $64,000 question. You ready? Here's the question for all of us. Do our politics determine our religious affiliation, or does our religion determine our political affiliation? That's a tough question, right? Right? That's a tough question. Are my politics informing where I go to church, or is my religion informing whether I go or not? Church, synagogue, Muslim. It's a good question. We're not going to talk about that. That's a little gift. That's a gift for you to take with you. All right. Now let's look at atheists and agnostics and nothing in particular. Over here, right? Atheists. 87% of atheists voted for Biden. Agnostic, 84% voted for Biden. Nothing in particular, 61% voted for Biden. So the mean average, 77% of nones, people who are religiously unaffiliated, voted for Biden. Isn't that interesting, right? So those who identify as politically liberal tend to be not religiously affiliated at higher numbers. All right, now, number 6, desocialization. In 1990, a Gallup poll said that 7% of the population said they had no friends or only one, 7%. And 47% said they had 6 or more friends. I've never had more than 2 friends in my life. I don't know how anyone can have 6 friends. That's amazing to me. But anyway, but in 2021, the same survey asked the same question. 20% said they had 0 or only 1 close friend. So it went from 7% had no friends or 1 to 20%. And then in 1990, 47% said they had 6 friends or more. In 2021, 27% said they had 6 or more. There was another survey that asked people over 60 years old, how much time do you spend alone? And on average, 10, and I don't have all the numbers here, but the average was 10 hours of people over 60 spend time alone. So the overall impression, there's this concept called desocialization, which means that Americans are living more isolated lives than at any point in recent history, which may also be informing the decline, right, of religious affiliation. So it may be a religious reason, but it might just be in general, people are less religiously affiliated. And of course, in COVID, it super accelerated that process, right? All right. Number 7, loss of trust. Trust in the government, politics, presidential campaign, fun stuff. Over here, I don't know if you could see it, I don't want to block. In 1958, 75% of Americans said they trusted the federal government. In 2022, 29% of Democrats say they trust the federal government. 9% of Republicans said they trust the federal government. So in 2022, 19% of Americans trust the federal government. It went from 75% to 19%, right? Now you add to that some of the scandals that occurred in the Catholic Church, the scandals that have happened in the Southern Baptist denomination. You add to that some churches that are breaking away from denominations because of LGBT issues, because of women being ordained, right? There's a general increase of mistrust in institutions, religiously and politically. Number 8, changes in family structure. This is the last one. Changes in family structure. Obviously, the family has changed significantly since the 1950s. We have many more I don't even have to give you the data. We have many more divorced families. We have more same-sex couples. We have more single mothers or single guardians raising children. We have more same-sex couples raising children. We have many more interracial couples. So, I wanted to save that. I mixed these together by mistake. This is my last graph. Here are the percentages of Americans that are married. In 1973, 73% of the U.S. population were married. In 2018, 43% were married. So that's a 30 percentage point drop in 45 years, right? And the data shows that Democrats tend to be 10% more likely than Republicans to be divorced, right? So one question to ask, right, is that if we ask how do we get people back to our churches, synagogues, mosques, temples, are our congregations welcoming of people of these new structures, right? So in conclusion, why are 23 to 39% of the American population religiously affiliated? The answer is, it's complicated. It's very complicated, right? We don't know. So one question again for us to ask, we looked at 8 reasons, there could be more. One question to ask as sociologists or social scientists, we might say is, what do you think is the main factor for the increase of the decline of religious affiliation? And the second question we can ask, if people of faith, is what can we do in our houses of worship to be more inviting of people who are religiously affiliated? Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions. Okay. Anyone have any questions?
Hold on one second.
We have a microphone here. It's okay. I saw a hand here first. Pat? I'm sorry, I'm reaching over you. I'm sorry.
How do you count in the surveys for the fact that some people don't ever take surveys, some people don't speak the language, some people can't hear, blah, blah, blah?
That's an excellent question, and I couldn't include that. This is already, look how long this survey was, right? This talk was. But, hold that mic a second. One thing is, some surveys will only call people who have cell phones. All right? So if you don't have a cell phone, which tend to be older people, right? Traditionally, they're not included in these data, right? Some will include landlines. That'll be different. But you could imagine the difference, right, in numbers. And so that does not include that audience. And then there are other, like you mentioned, there are other reasons. But that's just one example. So that's why we want to look at this information, kind of be critical of it. However, as I showed you, 6 different surveys from simple to intricate ask these questions, and all of them show a decrease in religious affiliation. I saw a hand here in the back. Pat, can you pass that back? Yeah. Yep.
Are the same things happening in the seminaries and other organizations that train the leaders?
That's an excellent question. I don't have that data, but I know.
Just in general.
Yeah, I know several seminaries that are closing, that have closed, several seminaries that have consolidated. There have been some seminaries that were denominational seminaries, and maybe they still are. And then over the years, they've made it more interdenominational so they can include more people. Also, you know, ministry jobs don't pay very much, right? It's a call. And so you have people who are, seminary tuition is expensive. So you have that happening as well. And also, if you're a young person who wants to work in ministry, and you tend to be maybe a little bit more liberal or suspect, right? That might inform some of your decisions. And then you have, right, then you have groups, young people want to go to ministry, they'll want to go to a, quote, conservative seminary, or they'll want to go to a liberal seminary, right? Or a denominational seminary. All those things are informing, yes.
Well, it's the doctrinal statements of the seminaries. When they combine, do they negotiate the doctrine and all that kind?
That's a good question. I can't generalize. I think each seminary will do their own thing. Thank you. Someone else have a question. Thank you. A question, a thought? A question, a thought? An insight? Yeah, over here. We have a question right here. Oh, in the back too. Okay, right here, both of these. Let's pass that microphone down. Stacy's coming around. Ding, 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 ding. All right, in the back. Yeah.
Is there a survey that looks at the decline in religious affiliation and then looks at the increase in crime and violence in this country and sees what's going, you know the question?
Yeah. I don't have that information. I don't have that information. So I can't really answer that thoughtfully. I can point that history has shown many of the great wars and atrocity were by people of faith, right? Christians, Muslims, Hindus, right? History, that's just history. Just look at history. But I don't have any data specifically on that. Atheists would critique, and agnostics would critique. Their argument is a stain to be good without God. Their thinking is that you can be very good. There's an assumption that without belief in God, you automatically become a mass murderer, right? And there's no evidence to show that, right? I don't have the data. I don't know. I would think there are probably a lot of religious people in prison. I don't know, But it's an interesting question. But people, it's a good question because people who are agnostic or atheists kind of argue that a little bit, that you can be an ethical person without belief in a higher power. Right? It's interesting. But thank you for asking. Yes, sir.
In both religion and politics, to me, the birth rate reproduction issue is the most important factor.
That's a huge factor because particularly Mormons, Muslims, right, encourage growth of their numbers. So this, sorry. Over here. This number right here of other faith traditions will continue to increase. And if we have if the decrease of white women giving birth, right, increase of certain religious groups that tend to be more, I'm not using these terms judgmentally, that tend to be more conservative, right, or very conservative, maybe fundamentalist. I'm not using that word judgmentally. I'm just, they tend to encourage very large groups.
Muslim is 8 reproduction rate, white women are less than 2.
Really? Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Thank you. Can you repeat that? Does he have the microphone? All right, let him.
The reproduction rate among Muslims is 8. For white women, it's less than 2.
It's 2, okay. Also, there's a correlation between wealth and birth rate, right? Generally speaking, the statistics show the more money a household, the less children. Yes?
I was wondering if there's any information you have on the influence of mass media and the internet on religious affiliation, because my impression is if you turn on the radio, there's a lot of evangelical Christian radio, and on television, Sunday morning, there's a lot of that, but you don't see any Presbyterians, to my knowledge, and I have no idea what happens with the internet.
Thank you for that. I don't have any information on that. That would be something interesting to look into. Thank you for that. Over here, we have, Stacy's getting his steps in. There he comes. A drone. We need a drone in here. That's good one. Good one, Jim. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you think that the disintegration of the family is a cause or an effect of this?
Well, I'll say this. I won't use the word disintegration, but certainly we're seeing that the change in family and structure probably is informing. Now, I haven't done enough research to thoughtfully comment on that. But I would have to think the change in family structure would somehow influence. And that's certainly one of the reasons of why people maybe are not going to church. But I haven't done a deeper dive, so I'll just hold off on commenting on that. Thank you for that, though. Anyone else? Just looking at the time.
Do you have any suggestions as how to improve the church attendance?
No. Do I have any suggestions on how to improve church attendance? Just, love God, love your neighbor.
You've improved attendance.
I have good attendance here. For the lecture on Sunday. Yes, right here, Pat.
Do you think that more younger people are leaving the church instead of the older?
So I eliminated a whole little section on what's called the life cycle effect, which we know already, right, just in our church, but the data shows that you'll have children, teens, right, they might go to church, youth camps, and then they'll reach an age, maybe college age-ish, they'll leave, and then if they have children, right, if they get married, they may want to come back. There is an effect on that. Another thing is, as people get older or have physical limitations, they can't attend church, right? Now, that doesn't mean that means they're not attending church physically, but now with online, right? Like if I'm not asking for an answer, I'm just saying, like if someone says, oh, do you go to church, right? But, you may say yes, but your church might be the online church, right? So that all of these things inform religious affiliation. Or you might say, no, I don't go to church. Oh, you're not a believer? Well, of course I'm a believer, right? It varies. These things vary. So there's a really good nuanced questions. Someone else. Going once. Over here, Pastor. Right here. Hold on a sec. Here comes the mic. Pastor John.
That's right, John. You make me work. I like it.
COVID has made a decrease in attendance quite a bit.
Yeah, it has. COVID has significantly increased. I think one of the data points said 80% of people who are religiously affiliated say that their church is offering online. And so that's, if I could use a religious term, well, not a religious, but like the mixed blessing, right? Like on the one hand, you might have a decrease, people maybe have not returned. On the other hand, you have another group of people who might be attending through online. And as you know, one of my pastor friends would say is, how has that impacted the collection? That's the important question. But yeah, COVID has significantly impacted that, yeah. Yes, right?